So it's just like, okay, let's just have a real talk, no censorship.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of the Boiling Frogs Post Roundtable from boilingfrogspost.com. I am your co-host today, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and of course the host of the Eye Opener Report that comes out on a weekly basis here on boilingfrogspost.com. And I'm joined today by Sibel Edmonds, of course the founder and editor of boilingfrogspost.com, and also Guillermo Jimenez of tracesofreality.com, who also does the Demanufacturing Consent podcast here on Boiling Frogs Post. And generally, we're also joined by Peter B. Collins, but unfortunately, it seems he has not made it to the conversation yet, so hopefully he'll be joining us shortly. But we are going to proceed anyway for the time being, and first off, we'd like to talk, of course, just briefly about the fundraising drive that we have, the quarterly fundraising goal at boilingfrogspost.com, where we've been trying to raise $12,000 in order to help fund all the podcasts and all of the work that's coming out of boilingfrogspost.com, and of course, also, as listeners and viewers of the Eye Opener Report will know, to keep the Eye Opener Report completely free and open to the public. So, Sibel, perhaps you can give us an update of where we are on that fundraising drive.
Sure. I want to start by telling everyone, all our supporters, a major thank you for all their supports. It's been really heartening. It's been really great to see so much support. And coming from many people. We have had small donations and subscriptions, and that's exactly what we are looking for. We are looking for this publicly funded, publicly sponsored website that brings independent news and analysis and all this multimedia. So I want to thank everyone on behalf of the entire team here at Boiling Frogs Post. Thank you very much. We are almost there. We are $9,500. We have $2,500 left, and we have 4 or 5 days to go. So I hope that we can reach our goal by this coming Wednesday and continue what we are doing. And not only that, we really want to expand what we are doing. I am really itching. I want to have our own investigative reporters to follow and chase and uncover a lot of stories that no one else is daring to touch, and do so independently. Thank you very much, and we are counting on you. And we are the irate minority here, but we have a voice all together. Many thanks to all of you.
Guillermo, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to echo what Sibel said. It is heartwarming to see all the support come in. At the time that I recorded the last Demanufacturing Consent podcast, we were about less than halfway to the goal. And just in the last few days, they've come in, and the BFP audience has come through, as I knew they would. And this is, it's fantastic to have this. As Sibel says, this is the way to do it. A publicly funded, independent media venture. The people out there, I think, appreciate it, and it's showing in their support, in the viewership, and in their donations and subscriptions, rather. Sorry. So, it's a worthwhile cause, and people out there again are realizing the importance of independent media, and so I want to thank them again completely. I make it a point to thank them in every podcast. So especially now through this fundraiser, a big thank you to all of you who subscribe and donate to BFP. Could not do this without you.
That's exactly the point. We couldn't do it without you guys. And once again, the Eye Opener Report is being kept free and open by these donations and subscriptions. So I personally really would like to thank everyone who has donated to this drive and helped to make this possible. And remember, we're not quite there yet, so we do need the last few days. We need that last push to get us to the goal. But I thank everyone who has contributed so far. And I just want to echo what Sibel said. I'm glad that this is coming from a lot of small donations rather than a few big donations. Because of course we all know how the sugar daddy view of journalism works,
yes.
And I don't think that's the funding model that we want to emulate. So my hats off to all of you guys out there who have helped to chip in and make this possible. And on that note, there will be no Eye Opener this week, as unfortunately I'm working behind the scenes diligently on a documentary, and I really have to get it finished this week. So the Eye Opener Report will be resuming again as usual next week. So once again, thank you to all your guys out there for your support. Now let's jump into the real meat and potatoes of today's conversation, and I want to discuss a topic that I've thought about quite a bit over the years, and I think is an interesting topic to think about. And I frame it with the question, why do people believe stupid things? And people might remember that as a title of a book by Michael Shermer, who at the time was writing about people believing in spoon bending and things like that, and why do people believe kooky things like that. And he talked about logical fallacies and the like. But of course, everyone should remember Michael Shermer is the person who wrote an article for Huffington Post saying that, of course, Oswald killed Kennedy by himself, because I've been to Dealey Plaza and stood in the spot where Kennedy was, and it's not that far from the book depository, which is, again, a stupid argument to make. Could someone be that stupid and make an argument like that, or be as supposedly intelligent as someone like Shermer and supposedly as shrewd about logical fallacies, and yet make a fallacious argument like that and expect his audience to believe it? It does really beggar the imagination, and it makes one wonder on so many of these different issues, whether it is something like an Oswald JFK, or whether it's the official story of 9/11, or whether it's some of the things that I know you guys cover. For example, Guillermo, you cover the drug war, and the idea that, oh, the CIA, they don't ship in the drugs. Why do people believe stupid things like that? Why do people believe all sorts of silly things about what's happening in Turkey, or for example, or when we talk about false flag terrorism? There are so many different avenues to explore here, and I think it's important to do this because one of the first things that always happens when the mainstream talks about conspiracy theories is they try to get away from the facts as quickly as possible in order to psychologize the conspiracy theorists. Why do they believe these things? Oh, it's because it provides them with this totalizing worldview that makes them feel better about what they believe and makes them feel better about the world. Oh, it's not chaotic, it's all orderly, and therefore it makes them feel better. They like the idea that there's people manipulating these things behind the scenes. When, of course, the reality I would posit is the exact opposite, that it's much more comforting to believe that it was 19 guys with box cutters who overpowered the air defenses of the United States that day than the idea that there were elements within the U.S. government that were actually helping to bring that about. That's a much scarier thing to believe, and I think one that takes more moral courage and fortitude to look at that evidence and to examine it squarely. That's, of course, an issue that I've been looking at for several years, so it's one that I think of immediately when I think of this topic. But first, let's get your thoughts on some of the stupid things that you've noticed that people do believe, whether it's Obama's hope and change or the drug war or whatever it is. What are some of the issues that you respond to and that gets your ire raised when you think about how many people just fall into believing some of these ridiculous things? Let's start with Guillermo. What are some of the things that you think of when this topic is raised?
Oh, well, you mentioned the one that I spend the bulk of my attention looking at and covering, which is the war on drugs and the sort of. But as far as the broader question of why people believe stupid things, I hate to reduce it to this, but honestly, I just think that a lot of people out there are just not very bright. I mean, if you look at the averages, the law of averages, most people are just not that bright. I mean, and I got in a little bit of trouble last time I said this on a show because I was interviewing some guys from the Joy Camp crew, and this came up, and I didn't say it as delicately then, but it's something that it's not very popular to express, but it happens to be true when we look around ourselves and we look at the culture, for example, and the sorts of things that become very popular, the sorts of things that grab a lot of people's attention. It tends to be lowest common denominator, tabloids, celebrity, things that are salacious, and we've talked about this before on the program as well. And that is what most people like, and so I have to reflect on that and say, well, that's a reflection on their sort of way of thinking, their mentality, and I guess again, I don't want to reduce it to as simple as that, but I mean it does play into it, I think, a little bit at least. But as far as specific things. I guess I would have to go back to what you said about the war on drugs and just the crazy inconsistencies in the way of thinking about these issues. I talked about this on the podcast a little bit, but I guess it bears a little bit of repeating the podcast with Peter Christ. We were talking about just the idea of prohibition and how some people, generally considered to be conservatives, to throw out the labels that we discussed last time also on the Roundtable, they generally think that prohibition, prohibiting drugs, is a good thing, and it works. It can work to control society, can work to limit crime and drug crime and gang crime and stuff like that. But when you think of gun-related crime, they're adamantly against gun prohibition, because they believe that if you prohibit guns, then only criminals will have guns. But there is this gigantic disconnect between that idea and the idea of prohibiting drugs in general. And so that again, it just goes to show the level of stupid that they can't bridge that gap. They can't make that connection and say, no, it's simply just the idea of prohibition in either case does not work. It just doesn't. So that's just one quick example that comes to mind right now.
Well, for me, it's usually, it becomes circular, because there is this thing about being intelligent, the raw IQ. So when we say stupid here, we're not talking about, oh, these people have really minimal IQ. So it's not about IQ. Then what is it? Then it gets really close to the notion of being ignorant. So how do you separate being stupid from ignorance, right? So a lot of people who may have extremely high IQs, which I know a lot of people who are like, Mensa level IQ, but they can be very, very stupid because of the ignorance. And I say that it becomes circular because then you go and chase and say, well, why are they ignorant? Because again, many of these people, if you look at their background, they have gone to college and university, they have gotten their degrees. A lot of them, they have good jobs, but they are still very, very ignorant. And considering the fact that today it's so easy to go reach and grab knowledge, to research, to find out about things, whether it's about Turkey or what's happening in Ukraine, or as you just mentioned, the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, these resources for free, they are all around us. And yet these people, they still remain ignorant. Is it because they're so stupid that they don't go and grab these and they are ignorant, which makes them more stupid? So it becomes this circular kind of an argument for me, trying to pinpoint and say how much of it is that and how much of it is actually intentional ignorance. Because life becomes difficult and there are difficult questions that ends up begging answers. And people frequently, they don't want to be in that position. I see that even with people with their associations with me. My daughter attends a play school during the week, and I go there and the mothers are standing in the corner. They're there to pick up their children and they associate with each other, but they're afraid to talk with me, and even if some topics comes, for example, I start kind of trying to measure the reactions on this Common Core issue with education, because Oregon just passed a law and now it's going to be, and it is being implemented in the schools. They haven't done any research. I have been for the last 2 months, I have been spending hours every day researching ins and outs of Common Core. So either they don't know anything about it, and when I ask questions or I give them, actually, I'm taking with me some printed research material, they get very uncomfortable. It's like, oh no, because if I know about it, I have to think about it. And if I think about it and I see some horrible things that can happen to my child, then I have to do something about it. I don't want to be in that position. So I rather not know. I rather not to associate with people like Sibel, because they force critical thinking and they are basically making me face these issues. So I'm in my safe zone. And what I told you the other day via email, James, is people, they like to carve out these little boxes, get inside, squeeze themselves, and they want to live inside that box. It's that golden retriever and a little fence and the 2 kids back to back and their 401k and their golf, maybe not. And then what they would do when they're 65 and they retired, maybe they want to live inside these little boxes that they themselves have carved out. And that drives me crazy. I usually refer to it as this mediocrity. Okay. And that may come across as something arrogant, oh, I am so good. And here are these vulgar, mediocre people. I'm elite. No. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people actually intentionally putting themselves in this mediocre, tiny little box. And this little short life that we have, spend it wanting to be in the safety zones, no critical thinking. And how much of that is the stupidity, or how much of it is the intentional choice to be ignorant and stupid? And that's how I see it.
I agree with that analysis very much so. That resonates with me because, again, the issue of stupidity and lack of intelligence, I think we can all identify that, but the question, I think, really is where does that come from? And I don't like to blame the victims for their victimization. I think to a certain extent, we have been crippled by the crippled epistemology of this education system that we all experience as children, or the vast majority of us experience as children, which really drums out of us the natural curiosity that I think everyone really does have. I don't know that many people who aren't actually innately curious about the world. And now, of course, experiencing that with my own 10-month-old son, I know he's exceptionally curious about everything that he can get his hands on. And again, that's just the human nature. How does that get drummed out of us to the point where people will literally run away from information? And I think the iconic image when that comes to in that framework is the scene from They Live, where he's trying to fight the guy to put on the glasses. If you've ever seen that movie, and the guy's fighting against it. They literally fight to resist the idea that they just don't want to see things, because if they see it, they have to do something about it. So I think I don't like to blame the victims for their victimization, but if there is anywhere we can lay blame on people for being ignorant, it is, I think, in the moral cowardice, i.e. they just don't want to live up to the actual moral obligations that come with knowledge. And then there's a second part of that I just forgot as I was speaking. But there's moral cowardice and laziness. Laziness would be the other. I mean, I'm sure there is a significant degree of that. But I think it's the moral cowardice that concerns me more. Because, again, the idea that people would resist learning about foundational events of the era that we're living through, like 9/11, because they are scared of the consequences of that knowledge, to me is... It's sickening. To my core, it is sickening, because that is exactly, precisely how we can be and are ruled over by a relatively small oligarchy, because they count on people being just too cowardly to actually to face this information and to do something about it. Because, again, once you know it, you have to do something about it.
Indeed. No, I think both of you raised really, really important points. The idea of this being... in a way, systemic. It's institutionalized within the education system is a really good example of that. Broadly speaking, just the economics at play that, as you mentioned, Sibel, most people have to worry about, what am I going to do today as far as my job goes, putting food on the table, making sure there's a roof over my head, caring for my family, looking forward to retirement. And, that's about it. That's, don't bother me outside of that box. And to that extent, it's really, I mean, again, like you, James, I don't want to blame someone like that for caring about those things. Obviously, those things are important to every single one of us to care for ourselves and for our families, for sure. But there is room. Clearly, there is room to also do that and also care about these important issues, because they affect you regardless of whether or not you want them to. Regardless of how much you want to trap yourself in that box, as you said, Sibel, or shut your eyes to it. Another good movie reference, I think, would also be The Matrix, of course, where the character of Cypher wants to go back into the Matrix and not see the world for what it is. Because that is, I think, as you said earlier, James, that is much more psychologically satisfying, to not be bothered with those realities and to not have to deal with that. I know lots of people in my own personal life who I experienced throughout, since I was in college, coming across people, talking to them, engaging with them about issues. 9/11 was a big one. And I remember that at the time, I had literally friends of mine tell me, I just don't want to hear it. I mean, there's probably something to it. You probably have something, that you want, that's important there. But, I'd rather just not hear about it. I don't want to deal with it. I got my own problems. You know what I mean? I don't want to deal with that on top of what I got to deal with in my daily life. So that has a lot to do with it. So I have to wonder, again, if we look at this broadly, to what extent there is some level of intentionality there as far as how the economics of this are structured such that it is very difficult for ordinary people to care about these issues and care about the big stuff and look at the big picture, because it's just so bogged down by the economics, by the consumer culture, by materialism, by the Hollywoodization, as we talked about yesterday. Just so many different factors at work here and at play. So Wow, I don't know where else to go with that, but I mean,
well, I have actually, maybe the better question would be, how come then oddball people like us pop up? What is the recipe that creates this irate minority? And that's us and all our viewers and our supporters here. Because, people usually get into this whole two notions of nature or nurture. And I'm looking just, let's say, at myself. I had a father who was a super oddball. He was an activist. He was tortured. He was an adventurer. He was very active with many different things. He had taken a lot of risks. And my mother, which was the opposite, my mother was exactly, and it still is, one of those people who want to have that narrow box. And in fact, she's one of those people who likes to teach her children, look down, because even if you make eye contact, it's like daring, trouble, and don't ever swim against the current, etc., etc. So I had the two opposite, and we were three sisters. I'm the oldest one. We went through the exact same educations. Okay, we are coming through the same set of genes. We had the same exact, father and mother. And, with my two sisters, they're fine. They're very successful, but they are totally in line with my mother's way of thinking of small box. My middle sister has been working for a bank, the investment portion of it. And if you were to ask her right now, who's the vice president, she wouldn't know. She does read Kardashian, and she is into the brand names. I don't even know the names. There's some bag, I forgot. Oh, Louis Vuitton, things like that. And my youngest sister, she's intellectual, but not into the political stuff, again. But how come three of us were exposed to the same institutions, education system? We all went through this turmoil of living in Iran, Azerbaijan, anarchy, seeing all those things. The same father who was a great example in terms of, my God, you dare things, and you always have courage, and the same mother who's the exact opposite, and then turn out so differently. Then what is that ingredients? Because I really can't point to nurture or nature, same background, same institutions. What made the difference? And I can't figure it out. What is it that distinguish those people who stand up and they do break outside those little boxes, the little tiny little boxes, and those majority who don't? So maybe we should ask James why some people are like us, odd. The minority,
right.
The weird ones, the oddballs, the black sheep.
To a certain extent, doesn't this come down to the ineffableness of personality? I mean, just there are people who are born with different personalities, and perhaps that plays into this. So if I were to psychologize myself, I would say that I have always been a person who has always attempted to question what authority figures are telling me. From the time I can remember when I was in fourth grade, I was 8 or 9 years old or whatever, and I remember in science class once the teacher decided to take a test. Like, it was something along the lines of this object, do you think it would float in water or sink in water or something like that, or I can't remember what the thing was. And so they took a vote, and who thinks it'll float, who thinks it'll sink or whatever. And then afterwards, after we learnt the correct answer, and I had the correct answer in that vote, afterwards, I decided, well, actually, I want to change my vote and then I started to reason the other way around. Even though I knew at that point it was wrong, I just wanted to know, well, why isn't it this way? And I've always been like that. I've always wanted to test the other side of the argument and test the other side of the equation. So I think maybe that's part just of my inborn nature. I don't know if I can pin that to environment or to nurture or anything like that. But then that presents the other question, which I think is the more important one, is how do we get people to, if not completely fundamentally change their nature, but I guess to at least to begin the transformation, to at least begin testing the boundaries that they've placed for themselves. And I think you're right. I mean, so many of our boundaries are self-imposed, including all of our intellectual and sort of the boundaries of where we will go in terms of looking at alternative discourses. And how do you get people to start questioning that? And I don't want to put myself on a pedestal here. Of course, I'm someone who came from, for example, just 7 or 8 years ago, complete ignorance about the real facts of 9/11, totally read the 9/11 Commission report and thought, oh, that sounds about right. I didn't even begin questioning this till about 2006, which is just ridiculous. Why did I believe that for so long? And then why did I start questioning it? And I don't know if I have a good answer to that. It's just that at a certain point, I started to look into it for myself rather than listen to what I was being told. And as soon as I started to do that, I started to encounter all the information that went counter to the narrative. And I thought, oh, I've been lied to all this time. So I guess the question is, how do we get people to begin doing it for themselves? Because we can talk to people about facts till we're blue in the face, but it will not penetrate if they do not want it to penetrate. And I think we have to make people desire the knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, there is an innate desire to knowledge, as you said earlier, but there are people who do resist certain types of information that will challenge their way of thinking and their fundamental sort of framework or worldview or what have you. It's interesting, though, through hearing you both talk about your own personal lives and how you've sort of moments in your lives where you can sort of trace back and how, you sort of came to your way of thinking now. And if I do that, I can do that myself. And I think that that is the sort of like the big question as far as what drives our personalities. How do we arrive at this point? Nature versus nurture and all that stuff. And it's hard to say for me also, because I can remember, as well as a young child, being naturally rebellious, getting in trouble in school, being in high school. I've relayed the story a couple of times on the podcast, but there was a couple of instances I remember in my world geography class in high school where one day I decided that I was not going to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. I just wasn't going to do it. I just thought, and it wasn't even political. I was not really politically minded yet at that time, really. It was just more so a question of authority, wondering, well, why should I? Why do I have to do that? Because I said so. Well, that's not good enough for me. That doesn't make any sense at all. I'm just not going to do that then. If you can't give me a good reason, then I'm just not going to do it. And that prompted a quick visit to the principal's office and several subsequent visits as well. But so there's little things like that I can reflect on as a young lad. But as far as getting people out there to sort of break out of their shell, so to speak, or to look at the information that we're looking at, and we touched on this a little bit on one of our previous roundtables. Because as we said earlier, I think most people are drawn to things that are, entertaining, that make them smile and laugh and not just, think about these sorts of things. So, I mean, beyond that, I'm having trouble trying to think of a way that the general public can come to accept or at least consider some of these bigger ideas and issues. I think it has to be presented in a way that's accessible to them. I really think that that's key. Is becoming better at communicating the message, not dumbing it down, not going lowest common denominator, but just becoming better.
When you say that, so that brings up the problem that we're dealing with, though, because everyone does come at this with their own personality, with their own experiences, with their own sensibilities, with their own boundaries, with their own ideas of where that line is and how far across they're willing to go, and etc. So, to my mind, this cannot come down to a one-size-fits-all package. Yeah. We cannot just become better communicators in some general sense and everything will be better. And I think I get so much frustration from a lot of people who contact me through the website who are saying, well, how do I reach my friends or my family? They don't talk to me anymore because all I talk about is this and they don't want to talk about it or something like that. Yeah. And I don't have an answer to that because I don't think there is. There's nothing that I can say that will, if you just say this, the magic words. I don't think there's a way to put this because everyone comes at it differently. The approach that I take is that I don't invest my everything in my relationships with other human beings. I don't invest everything in, okay, you have to believe this 9/11 truth or I won't associate with you or whatever it is. The approach I take is I have definitely my ideas, I have my facts, I have the things that I believe about this, and if you want to discuss this, we'll discuss it, and frankly and openly. But I don't push it. I don't try to proselytize it, and I think that people everyone has to put it in their own way. And for me, I just couldn't possibly put it in any other way than the expression of who I am and the way I put things. So I tend to be very intellectual and rigorous and logical, and that's just my boring, dry nature. And I know there's a lot of people out there that don't respond to it. There are other people who do respond to it. Great. The people who respond to it will be receptive. The ones who aren't, I can't be responsible for that. So I don't think it has to come down to our style of communication. We don't have to question that fundamentally. I think we just have to be true to our style of communication and try to put that as honestly and forthrightly as possible. And at the end of the day, then it becomes the responsibility of the people who will or won't listen to the information, who will or won't check into the information for themselves, which comes back to that fundamental psychology. What is the psychology that makes people want to or not want to fundamentally make that move to question?
And I wanted to talk about the fact that this is exactly the reason we picked this line of communication, and we are doing what we are doing with Boiling Frogs Post, with Corbett Report, with Traces of Reality, with this show, because, you know, outside in my personal life, I'm more like James. In fact, I'm one of those people who end up not associating with almost anyone because I'm not a very social person. For some reason, I come across as someone who's aggressive and social. It's the opposite in my personal life. I feel comfortable being alone. And the only reason I socialize very little is because of my daughter. Taking her to park, going, you know, to the play school and trying to get her socialized, which in a way sounds like hypocrisy. But that is the opposite of those people who have started mass movements, you know, because if you look at even throughout the history with religion, what do those people have in common? I mean, I have seen them, those types of people. I mean, they are like magnets. They know how to talk, like they almost hypnotize you. And they are able to bring this congregation to follow them, and they expand. For me, that's always been something mysterious, you know. On you know, one hand, you have the politicians who are doing that. Then you have always had the religious cult, and I'm talking about the mass religion too, everywhere in the world. Like Fethullah Gulen that I talk about and I write about, that was his knack. And his secret was to get all these followings who really are looking into the things that he wants them to look at and do things and take actions. His key was always to get them close with this very pseudo kindness and do good things to people, let them like you, okay? Then you hook them. And once you hook them with that kind of a kindness kind of a thing, bring them around even as if they think they themselves by choice are doing it, even though somebody else is bringing them around. And this is, I believe, what you were just talking about. We are not here trying to do that. And that is this mass movements when we are changing minds into our way of thinking, which I believe even among ourselves, we have our own variations and differences. We are just putting forth these different notions, different things that people need to look at from their own angles, through their own lenses, and then engage in critical thinking. Now they may arrive at a conclusion that is completely the opposite of you or I or Guillermo thinks, but at least they have thought and they have come up with. And if that's the case, then again, the question becomes, all right, so does that summarize our objective? And that is to present people all these different issues that are really important, macro issues, significant things, put before them various angles and various views and facts, and at least get them to hear, to understand as much as they can, as much as they want, to process through their own lenses and to think. And I think if we have accomplished, or if we accomplish that, or half of it, I believe that's a very significant thing to do. And there is no agenda, because when you're looking at these big movements, there's always like an end goal agenda there. They are moving towards from A, they want to move people to point B. That point B is usually what those leaders, those cult heads, whether religion, that is what their goal is. So it is all this, I give them, because I want to get you to point B, but that point B is that person or that power or that corporate mindset or the shadow government. It is their point B. And a lot of people, they move towards that point B. They consider themselves activists, which is not actually their own point B. It's a point B, the end destination determined for them by the powers.
That's a really good point. The sort of the cult aspect of this, and the idea, and there's plenty of cult of personalities within media. There's too many of them, in fact. And so, what I was saying earlier about maybe trying to reach more people in different ways. I'm not suggesting that anyone should change their sort of approach in any way, especially not this, because as part of the appeal, I think, to me personally, before even becoming part of Boiling Frogs Post, was just as an observer, was the fact that it did not do the sort of things that you saw other people doing. For example, your way of presenting things, James, and as you said, in a logical, rational, without the sensationalism, without the sort of doing all those sorts of things. I think that's really, really important, and I think that in itself does speak to people and says, look, just present them with the information, present them with the sort of different way of looking at something, and again, you can't be responsible, you said earlier, James, for reaching everyone. If you present someone with the information, they choose not to look at it or choose for whatever reason to ignore it, that's on them. And something else that reminded me of it, kind of a funny aside, but I was rewatching a couple of documentaries yesterday on Bill Hicks, and so it was the anniversary of his death. It was Bill Hicks' Day, and I was a huge fan, huge influence in my own life. And he was doing an interview, and they were asking him. The question from the reporter was, "Why can't you do something that appeals to everyone?" And he's like, appeals to everyone? What a challenge. I will please all people. It's never been done in the history of the world. How are you going to appeal to everyone? You can't, obviously. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, and that you're never going to reach everyone. And in fact, you don't need to. That as we talked about this last time, it is the irate minority after all. And that's, that in itself is something that we can look at and focus on is looking at people that are already sort of willing to question it. They don't have to think exactly as James, Sibel, or I do. As you mentioned, Sibel, each one of us has our different opinions, and that's a really, really good thing. And I think that's important to point out, that we can differ, and yet we can also agree on very important fundamental issues. So.
Well, I think there was one other aspect to this that we might be missing out on, which I think I alluded to at the beginning of this conversation. Another potential answer, why do people believe stupid things? They're lying. Look at a Michael Shermer. Does he really believe, when he puts forward his argument, that Oswald killed Kennedy acting alone because he stood in the spot where Kennedy was when he got assassinated, and it's really close to the book depository? Therefore, it must have been Oswald acting alone. It's a complete non sequitur. It doesn't make any sense. It's logically fallacious. It's a non-argument. And Shermer is smart enough to know that. He is lying to his audience and expecting them to believe it. So I think there is an awful lot of just flat-out lying that goes on, certainly among the myth makers and narrative formers out there, trying to get people to believe it. And to a certain extent, maybe that's that cult of personality, or at least people's credulity. Again, people want to believe authority because, again, that makes it a lot easier for them. So if an authority figure comes along with a convincing enough lie, no matter how stupid it is, no matter if you scratch the surface of that lie, all of the veneer of sheeny lineness will drop away from it, and the disgusting cockroach reality underneath will present itself. But people just love that veneer, that it just looks so glossy and so nice that they just don't want to scratch at it. So I think the other aspect of this is there are people who just flat out lie 100% and expect others to believe it, and sadly enough, a lot of people will.
Well, I'm going to do it. I know we said we're not going to talk about all the Snowden Greenwald things, but you just pushed it.
You kind of have to. You kind of have to, yeah.
James, but that is another good example of what you just said. You had this person, this reporter or commentator, Greenwald, who talked about how bad it was, these people who worked for big, nasty corporate media, and therefore they were influenced by the government and the corporations, etc. And with the latest exposés, now he's talking and saying, well, it doesn't matter. First of all, those are the only options. There are no other options. That's a lie. What are we doing here? How about hundreds of other decently, fairly successful places have been doing on the web, on the internet. So that's
before
fine.
you get into that, we should tell people what this is, because some people might not have seen the
go
latest
ahead.
development.
You do the intro, because then I'm gonna say a few words on that, because that is the perfect current example. Therefore, it's justified. I know we said we were not going to talk about it, but
okay. But just to get everyone on board, in case they haven't been watching the developments, as I'm sure you'll know if you've been watching Boiling Frogs and the Eye Opener, of course, Glenn Greenwald, Jeremy Scahill, Laura Poitras are heading something called The Intercept, which is a branch of First Look Media, which is the news organization that's been founded and funded by billionaire investor Pierre Omidyar, who also runs the Omidyar Network. And he is a billionaire who has invested $250 million, so far has put actually $50 million into First Look Media. And they have, this is the organization that's going to be publishing the Snowden leaks from here on in, from the Greenwald-Poitras cache. Now, the interesting latest development is that Pando Daily has just put together a report showing that, yes, in fact, Pierre Omidyar is co-invested with the U.S. government in the very pro-democracy groups that are behind the coup in Ukraine right now, which is a pretty significant thing, and something that you would expect with this fearless adversarial journalism and the no-holds-barred, there's no limits on what we'll report, First Look Media. You would expect someone from First Look Media would have something to say about it. In fact, someone who is associated with First Look, Marcy Wheeler, came out and said, oh, I think there's something behind this Ukraine coup. I think that there's something going on here. And when it turned out, oh, it's actually Omidyar, your sugar daddy. Oh, no, I didn't say coup. Did I say coup? No. It's all above board. It's all legitimate. It's all democratic. So now they're scrambling to get away from it. Greenwald just posted a big, long essay saying why it doesn't matter. I don't care what Omidyar does. I've never looked into his politics. I'm completely ignorant of them, and I don't care, and it doesn't matter what he's funded.
It doesn't matter at all. And the fact that if your boss, the one who gives you the money, the one who emails several times, who is more powerful than even their chief editor, because Jeremy Scahill was quoted there that Omidyar is the hands-on owner. He's not one of those guys who threw the money and said, you guys go be independent. And it's the same person who actually for several years was pointing finger at all these reporters saying they're working for these corporate medias, they have government ties. Government or possible government ties now is working because the dollars are there for a man who actually is partnered with government. Number one, he's partnered with NSA, with his PayPal corporations, okay? And we already reported on that. And Greenwald already confirmed this, saying, so what? Yes, no surprise there. Of course, NSA and PayPal, they work together and they have arrangements. Number two, this comes out that the PayPal's billionaire that owns Greenwald and the rest of them has put already $300 million to bring about revolution regime change that U.S. has determined in partnership with the USAID, together with another billionaire, George Soros. And the same Greenwald comes out and says, his background and his partnership with the government and do regime change. How many billionaires or big media can you find out when you don't have owners like that? So that exactly is the same example as you just provided. But you still have these people, despite all these exposés that have been coming out back to back, they are not willing to admit that they have been following someone who has putting forth not who he is, with all the lies and glossy stuff. And in some cases, I think that's the ultimate stupidity, is not wanting to admit you were wrong. I don't know why so many people have problem with that. I have done it so often. I have made some really stupid decisions in my life in the past. I have believed in stupid things. And then when I realize that, I come out and I say, you know what, that was really stupid. I give you a quick example. In 2003, 2004, it took me a couple of years to realize that these NGOs in Washington, D.C. that were whistleblower organizations, I ended up being tool for them. Oh, we go rally the Congress. This is how we go about these things. Then after a couple of years, I found out that, okay, George Soros and billionaires like Omidyar is funding them. They're agenda driven. Absolutely, their agenda is not the same as the good things for whistleblowers and for the transparency for the nation. But for 2 years, I actually went with them to Congress. I vouched for them. I said, kudos to these people who are standing up for whistleblowers. That was stupid. Okay. And I was naive. I was stupid. I was taken for a ride. I saw that, my eyes opened, and I admit that I was. You change. There is nothing. That is being smart. And for people who don't want to, what they call it, like, what is the English expression? They're going to end up with egg in their face, or they're going to eat crow. I guess those are the idioms that are used in English language. They just don't want to be in that position. And this is why I was warning all those whistleblowers who put their good reputation, like Thomas Drake, coming and defending and putting their names there. I'm like, watch out. They're going to go down because these people are slick. They're not who they appear to be. You're going to go down with them. And now they're in this position that if they admit, they have already come out there, done publicity for these people. And that is a height of stupidity. Now that we are talking about the stupidity, I think that was totally related, James. That's bringing up the Greenwald, Snowden, Omidyar example again. Yermo.
No, I completely agree with that point, especially the point about, I raised this issue on a previous podcast as well, and then I sort of put out there that I felt eventually people who went on board with First Look Media would, in time, regret their decision to do that. Because a perfect example, I'll give you, I'm maybe a little biased here, but I like Marcy Wheeler. I've always enjoyed her analysis. I've had her on my show a couple of times. She's always been really, really, good and spot on.
I agree.
And exactly. And so when I saw that she joined First Look, I was surprised and frankly disappointed because, again, I feel like in time, more and more of this stuff will come out and they're going to regret that decision. And I think, James, I mean, you summed this up, I think, really well with that. Can we call it a meme, or it's a quote by Upton Sinclair that's on your Twitter feed right now? It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his job depends on not understanding it. And that explains perfectly, as you pointed out, the response by Greenwald on The Intercept. It's just like, real. I mean, as I was reading it, it does. It's basically, to sum it up, it was like you said, I don't know. Look, I don't know what Pierre Omidyar does, and frankly, I don't care. That's basically the response: is don't know, don't care, not important. When in fact, it is. It has inherently, and the fact that continues to ignore that fact, to deflect that, it just looks more and more suspicious every time. I don't know why they simply, well, I guess I do know why, but why can't they just simply acknowledge the inherent conflict of interest that is there, address it, and because the other thing about, okay, he says things like, judge me on my journalism, judge me on the things that I do, judge me on the, okay, all well and good, fine, but you cannot ignore this. It's just simply too huge, especially when something like this.
But what is it like? Isn't it exactly identical to all the politicians who have become presidents and prime minister? I mean, it's exactly the same thing. When it comes out that this funding or their scandals, it's not really important. That's
Everybody
not the
does
message.
it. Everybody.
Let's not look back. Let's go forward. Let's look at the future. That is all the way behind me. Well, you get the same thing. But those guys, those politicians, they fool the people. It's like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. It's like, fool me 3 times, shame on me. Fool me 4 times, shame on me. And it keeps going on with these politicians. So if it has worked with all these politicians, maybe it's going to work in their case as well, because maybe people don't care. I don't know. And then it comes back to our topic, why people can be so stupid willingly. And that is our topic. And they can see all these things back to back. Since November, I've been writing. And every few weeks, some of these exposés on these lies, contradictions, conflict of interest, shady deals, all these stuffs are coming out. And they're still standing there like zombie. Doesn't matter. This person says it doesn't matter, and I want to believe this person. I want to be stupid, and I insist on being stupid. And don't you dare coming me challenging on my desire to be stupid, because that's a right. Wanting to be stupid is a right, and do not come and challenge my right to be stupid. Okay, that's the attitude.
Unfortunately so. All right. Well, I think we maybe have exhausted the boundaries of this conversation at this point. But if there's anything else either of you would like to add, speak now or forever hold your peace, or my son might get involved in here.
No, I think I could go on a little bit more on the Greenwald Pando stuff, but I won't for now because we'll be here for another hour on this probably. So we'll leave it there on as far as that goes. But no, again, I guess in closing, important issues. I hope people appreciate that, and I hope again. Just to reiterate what we opened with, I hope that people out there will continue to support independent journalism, not the way it's being redefined by billionaires, the way it's always been defined. Independent doesn't mean you have editorial control. It's always meant who is signing your checks, who is funding you. That's what independent means. And thankfully, there are independent outlets still available. BFP is one of them. I hope that people out there will appreciate that and continue in their support.
Exactly. You echoed exactly what I was thinking, Guillermo. And that is that some people really got upset with us for covering this whole Greenwald stuff. Some people, I said, I'm going to unsubscribe. Some people sent some really nasty emails. But throughout the time, as the time passes, the future comes in the end, we're going to come across as people who stuck by the truth, no matter how unpopular it was. That has been our motto at Boiling Frogs Post. It is not the desire for popularity, because believe me, if that were the end goal, the objective, my goodness, I would have come up with so many topics to make us so popular. We would have like 150,000 hits today. That is not the desire. We want to stick by the truth, look at the stuff critically, criticize the stuff, and truth is never popular when it's really timely. It never is, whether it's 9/11, any kind of a thing, if you look at throughout the history. So because of that, we are proving every day that we are not after popularity, but we are going on records. We are presenting it, and we are sticking by the truth. And those of you who are sticking by our side with us, and you're supporting us, I want to thank you on behalf of all our people, and still our number is increasing slowly. But one of the things that James brought up, with people who want to remain stupid because wanting to stay stupid and stupidity by choice is a right, and that is the fact that we have people, and I receive emails from them, James, and they say, I watched this show by James, or I listened to Guillermo, or I read this article. It made me stop. Up until this point, I was this, but now I started paying attention. Oh man, that makes everything so worthwhile. I mean, when I read those notes and emails, I don't know if there is anything above that as far as Boiling Frogs Post is concerned. When we get those notes from you saying, I was never even paying attention, it was not in my radar, thank you for bringing it into my attention. Not for changing my mind or anything, but thank you, because I was not aware of it. Thank you for presenting this. And we want to thank those of you who resist the stupidity, even though you know that you have a right to it. Thank you all.
Excellent. Well, on that note of resist the stupidity, we will wrap up today's conversation. Once again, Sibel Edmonds, BoilingFrogsPost.com, Guillermo Jimenez, TracesOfReality.com, and unfortunately, Peter B. Collins was not able to join us today, but hopefully he'll be back for the next roundtable, and I'm sure we'll have another interesting discussion lined up for you next time. So until that time, I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com and the Boiling Frogs Post Eye Opener, thanking you for joining us for this edition of the Boiling Frogs Post Roundtable.
Bye-bye.